They laughed when he reached for the piano. A rich kid's piano, they said. But the moment his fingers touched the keys, the room stopped breathing. Jason Brooks wasn't quiet because he was shy. He was quiet because words felt useless in a world that never listened. He lived on the rough side of Baton Rouge, crammed into a 2-bedroom apartment near Florida Boulevard, where the walls whispered secrets and the neighbors shouted theirs. His mother, Charlene, worked herself raw pulling double shifts at a local clinic. His brother Isaiah ran with a crew Jason didn't trust. Faces that looked like trouble and moved like it too. But Jason? He had music. Not a polished Steinway or some luxury studio gear. Just a battered, half-broken keyboard at the rec center down the block. Half the keys on that old keyboard didn't work. The power cord sparked if you breathed on it wrong. But to Jason, it was sacred. Every afternoon after school, he'd sprint there, heart thudding, fingers twitching with the need to create. No sheet music. No formal lessons. Just the sounds buried deep in his chest. Grief, joy, silence, rage. He played what he felt, and felt what he played. No one had ever taught him. But not everything worth knowing comes from a book. Some things are born inside you, raw and restless, waiting for the right moment to be heard. At school, Jason kept his head low. He wasn't loud, wasn't a problem, but he wasn't special either. Teachers missed the way his fingers danced drum beats on his desk, or how his eyes flickered when the school anthem played on the intercom. Most kids barely noticed him, unless they needed answers or someone to mock. His one true sanctuary was the music room, and Miss Delacroix, the only adult who saw him. Not just the quiet boy, but the artist hidden beneath. She'd catch him humming over lunch, pull him aside after class, and ask questions that made him think. About chords, about stories told with melody instead of voice. "You hear the world different than most, Jason," she once said after he improvised a lullaby for a pretend baby assignment. "Don't ever let that go." He didn't plan to. Then came the announcement. A joint arts exchange with Bayside Prep, the elite school across town. One day of workshops, performances, and exposure to a different kind of world. Most students groaned. Jason sat up straighter. Bayside. He'd heard the rumors. Lawns like golf courses, sushi in the cafeteria, baby grands in every music room. He'd never touched a real piano before. He'd only seen one once, at the concert hall when his class got free Philharmonic tickets. He didn't remember the music, just the pianist's hands, fluid, precise, divine. Maybe this time, he'd get closer. The night before the trip, Charlene ironed his best shirt, a faded white button-down with a stubborn stain near the cuff. "You behave," she warned, eyes never leaving the board. "Don't go embarrassing me in front of those people." "I won't. And don't touch nothing you're not supposed to." He nodded. He meant it. But music had a way of making him forget the rules. The bus ride was 30 minutes, but to Jason, it felt like a rocket to another planet. Bayside Prep gleamed like a postcard. The gates, the fountains, the buildings that looked like art museums. Students in matching blazers laughed in polished groups, their world wrapped in safety and shine. Jason stepped off the bus, backpack clutched tight, eyes wide. Inside, the floors glistened, the hallways breathed luxury. No shouting, no chipped tiles, no graffiti. Just quiet power. Student art lined the walls, framed like gallery pieces. One sketch had a price tag, $200. Jason stared. He could draw too. No one had ever asked to buy his sketches. They were ushered into the auditorium. The head of school, all silver hair and church sermon voice, spoke of unity and talent from all backgrounds. Jason scanned the crowd. He counted maybe 5 black students total. Most Bayside kids looked like they'd never been told, not today. Never had to wait for Friday for new socks. The jazz ensemble performed. Clean, polished, perfect, but something about it felt safe. like it had been rehearsed too many times, like every note knew its place and didn't dare stray. Then came breakout sessions. Jason was assigned to a songwriting workshop in room 208. He followed a group of kids he didn't know, their voices full of cafeteria sushi jokes and Tesla complaints. Room 208 took his breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows, instruments standing at attention, walls built to trap and honor every sound. But none of that mattered, because in the center stood a Steinway grand, black and gleaming, lid open like a promise. The piano. The instructor hadn't arrived yet. Most kids found seats without fanfare. Jason stood back, eyes locked on the keys like they might vanish. Then, don't even think about it. He turned. A tall boy with slick blonde hair, flanked by two others, sneered. His blazer was monogrammed PJW. "That's my dad's donation," he added. "You got anything like that in your neighborhood?" Jason blinked. "I wasn't gonna break it." "You sure?" "Careful. Those keys aren't made for dirty fingers." It was a slap disguised as words. The air shifted. A few kids turned. Jason felt heat rise to his ears. His hands stayed down, clenched. The piano seemed farther away now. But then someone laughed, and something in Jason snapped. Not in anger, but in purpose. One moment, he was frozen. The next, he was walking. To the piano. The smirk on the blonde kid cracked. His friends exchanged shocked glances. Jason didn't flinch. He pulled the bench out, sat slowly, like the moment belonged to him. His palms were sweating, his chest tight, but his fingers? Steady. The room quieted. Not silent, expectant. Jason raised his hands, then paused. This wasn't the broken keyboard at the rec center. This was thunder waiting to speak. He pressed a single key. C pure. Cling. It echoed like the start of a spell. Then E. Then G. A chord. Familiar. Oh. His left hand followed, slow walking bass. The right danced above it. A melody. His melody. The one he played in secret. For himself. For no one else. Conversation stopped. Chairs creaked. Eyes leaned in. He wasn't playing for them anymore. He was playing for the nights when his mom swayed in church, for the loneliness in his bedroom, for the silence that never asked questions. He stumbled once. Missed a note. Didn't matter. It was raw. It was real. It lived. When he stopped, the pause was thick. Then, "Whoa," someone whispered. Claps followed. A few at first. Then more. The blonde kid didn't speak. His jaw was tight. But Jason heard it. Beneath the silence. Respect. The door opened. The instructor stepped in, startled. "Did I miss something?" "Yeah," a student said. "You did." Jason stood. Pushed the bench in. Didn't speak. He didn't need to. For once, the silence spoke for him. But it wasn't over. In the hallway, a small crowd had gathered. Word had spread. Curious faces. Teachers. Students from other sessions. And then, Miss Delacroix. Her hand over her mouth. Eyes shimmering. "You played that." He nodded. "That was yours." Another nod. "Jason, that wasn't just music. That was something people remember." He didn't know what to say. Another woman approached. Tall, gray blazer, clipboard. "I'm Mrs. Coldwell. I run the advanced music program here. I heard you." From down the hall. He tried to speak. Nothing came. "Have you ever taken lessons?" He shook his head. "Where did you learn to play like that?" "Just practicing. At the rec. At home. Sometimes my brother lets me borrow his headphones." She smiled. "You've got something special. That kind of ear? That kind of feeling? You don't teach that. You guide it." Behind her, the blonde kid reappeared. No words, just eyes that didn't know what to make of what they'd seen. Miss Delacroix stepped forward. "Jason, How would you feel about performing at the closing event this afternoon? He looked up. Shocked. Me? Yes. They always save space for one guest student. I think, no, I know. That should be you. He looked at the floor, then at Mrs. Coldwell, then back to Miss Delacroix. A wave of nerves hit him like a second punch. Performing once in a classroom was one thing. Playing in front of the whole auditorium? I don't know, he muttered. You don't have to, Miss Delacroix said gently. But I think you'll regret it if you don't. He knew she was right. He nodded slowly. Okay. The teachers began to scatter, the hallway clearing, the moment folding back into the day. Jason followed Miss Delacroix as she led him toward the performance hall. His steps were slow, the hallway impossibly long. But something inside him was different now. It wasn't confidence, not exactly. It was closer to certainty. Like when a song plays and you already know where the notes go, even if you've never heard it before. Preston stayed behind, alone near the doorway. Jason, he said quietly. Jason turned. Preston looked like he wanted to say something. Maybe to take back what he'd said earlier. Maybe to act like none of it happened. But instead, he just gave the smallest shrug and turned away. But as Jason entered the auditorium later that day, he had no idea who else would be watching from the shadows, and how deeply his performance would echo beyond that room. The auditorium was brighter than Jason remembered. He stood behind the curtain, heart pounding, staring at the polished stage floor. Rows of chairs stretched out beyond the stage, already half filled. Students shuffled in with snacks and programs, joking and scrolling on their phones. A few teachers stood near the back, chatting in low voices. Everything looked casual, except to Jason. He was wearing the same wrinkled shirt from that morning, sweat beginning to darken the collar. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear of playing. He trusted his hands. It was the crowd, the unfamiliar eyes, the weight of being seen. Miss Delacroix appeared beside him, her voice low. They're going to love you. What if I mess up? He asked. You won't. And even if you do, they'll still feel it. That helped a little. The student announcer, a tall girl with thick glasses and a polished voice, introduced the event's closing performance. We'd like to welcome a guest student from Martin Luther King Jr. Middle School, Jason Brooks, with an original piano piece. Polite applause. Jason stepped out. He didn't look at the crowd, just focused on the piano waiting at center stage. It gleamed under the lights, same as before, like it knew him now. He sat, took one breath, let his fingers find their home, and he played. It wasn't the same melody as earlier. This one was slower, quieter, more patient, like a letter written out loud. It started with the kind of ache you can't name. Something in the pauses between notes, the way certain chords hung longer than they should. Then it shifted, grew warmer, braver, like something fighting to stand on its own feet. Every measure told a piece of him. The nights alone in his room. The sound of his mother praying in the kitchen when she thought he was asleep. The way the rec center keyboard sparked sometimes, but never stopped working. The room stilled. Even the faculty stopped whispering. Phones lowered, eyes lifted, and somewhere in the second half, the emotion behind his notes caught up to him. His chest clenched, his eyes stung, but his hands didn't falter. He played all the way through. When the last note faded, he lifted his hands slowly, like releasing something heavy. Silence. Then a single clap. Then another. Then the whole room. A standing ovation didn't happen. This wasn't a movie, but the applause was real. Full. Some students stood. One teacher wiped her eye. Even the announcer looked surprised. Jason stood, bowed without thinking, then walked off stage, fast, before the crowd could catch him. In the hallway, he leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Then a voice. That was incredible. He turned. Preston. His blazer was buttoned now, hair a little neater, but the cockiness was gone. He wasn't flanked by friends this time. "I didn't know you could do all that," he said. Jason said nothing. Preston shifted. "What I said earlier, I was out of line." Still, Jason didn't speak. "I guess I just didn't expect it." Jason looked at him, then said quietly, "You didn't have to." Preston nodded once. "Yeah." And that was it. No big moment. No handshake. Just an awkward pause and two boys standing in a hallway too big for either of them. Miss Delacroix came out, smiling. "You did it." He managed a breathless laugh. "I think I did." She looked at him for a long second. "Let's talk later. There's someone I want you to meet." But what Jason didn't know was that someone in the crowd had already made a call. One that would open a door he never imagined he could walk through. By the time the bus pulled back into the parking lot of Martin Luther King Jr. Middle, the sky was streaked with gold. Jason sat near the back, forehead resting against the window, watching Baton Rouge roll by in pieces. Fast food signs, gas stations, corner stores. Familiar again. Comfortable. But smaller now. He hadn't said much on the ride. Some classmates gave him high fives. A few asked how he learned to play like that. One boy, Jamari, even joked, "Bro, you made rich kids clap. That's magic." Jason had smiled, but inside, everything still buzzed. Not nerves. Not fear. Something else. He didn't have a word for it yet. Miss Delacroix waited at the bottom step as students climbed off the bus. "Jason," she said, pulling him aside gently. "That woman I introduced you to, Mrs. Coldwell, she wants to see you again." He blinked. "Why?" "She runs a summer arts program. Scholarship-based," she said. "It's rare to find someone like you who hasn't been formally trained." He looked down at his sneakers, the left one scuffed. "I don't have money for lessons." "That's the point," Miss Delacroix said. "You wouldn't need any. Everything's covered. You just have to show up and play." Jason didn't know what to say. Opportunities like that didn't come to kids like him. Not without strings. "I told her I'd talk to your mom," she added. "She'll want to know." That night at home, Charlene stood in the kitchen holding the brochure in one hand and a half-burnt grilled cheese in the other. Her face didn't say much, but her silence was loud. "They're not trying to use him for anything?" she finally asked. "No, ma'am," Miss Delacroix said from the other side of the table. "It's a real opportunity. They've done this for students across the state." Charlene looked over the paper again. "And he'd stay where?" "In dorms. Supervised. Baton Rouge School for the Arts. Just a few weeks. He'd be home by the end of summer." Jason sat on the edge of the couch, backpack still on, his fingers curled into the straps. His mother stared at him, not blinking. "You want this?" He met her eyes. "I think I do." She sighed deep. The kind of sigh she only made when her mind was traveling way ahead of her mouth. "He's 12, she said quietly. "Still a baby." "I'll be careful," Jason said, voice just above a whisper. "You better." She looked at Miss Delacroix again. "I'll think on it." That was more than enough for now. A week later, the letter came, a white envelope with blue trim, his name typed neatly in the center. Inside was the formal offer. Jason read it 3 times before handing it to his mom. She didn't say anything at first, just nodded, then handed it back without a word. He packed his things in a duffel bag that was too big for him. Miss Delacroix drove him to the campus herself. On the way there, she told him about other kids who had gone through the program, some who had never even touched a real instrument before their first lesson, others who'd gone on to places like Juilliard and Berkeley. "But none of them sounded like you," she said. "And I mean that. The campus wasn't like Bayside. It wasn't shiny. It wasn't fancy. But it felt honest. The music building had paint chips on the windowsill, and benches worn smooth from years of waiting students. He liked that. His first day, he played in front of 3 instructors. They didn't ask where he came from. They asked what key he felt most at home in. He said D minor. They nodded, like they understood. By the end of the first week, he'd written 3 new pieces. By the end of the second, he was teaching a classmate how to move through changes with feel instead of math. One evening after dinner, his instructor sat beside him in the practice room. "You know what I told my husband after I heard you play?" she said. Jason shook his head. That's what talent looks like when it's unafraid. But even with new keys in his hands and doors swinging open, Jason still had one more thing to do before any of it felt real. It was October when Jason walked back through the doors of Bayside Prep. This time, he didn't arrive on a school bus. No matching t-shirts. No field trip form in his backpack. He came alone, invited back by Mrs. Coldwell to perform at the annual fall recital. It was her idea, a surprise solo act from a student of the summer arts program, a way to show what raw talent could become. With the right support, Jason had grown a little taller since the spring. His jeans fit better. His curls were neater, and his hands had developed a quiet confidence. He still didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened. The auditorium looked just as he remembered it. Clean floors, bright lights. That stage, it didn't feel bigger than him anymore. In the front row sat Miss Delacroix, her purse balanced on her lap, eyes shining with quiet pride. And next to her, Charlene, wearing her best blouse, clutching the edge of her seat like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. She hadn't been sure about the performance at first. "I don't know what people like that want from kids like you," she had said. Jason had answered simply, "Just to hear." Now, here she was, waiting to hear. The MC gave a brief introduction. Tonight's final performer is a young man who reminds us why music still matters. Please welcome Jason Brooks. He walked out. Not too fast, not too slow, just steady. The Steinway was there again, waiting. This time, he didn't hesitate. The piece he played was new. Something he'd written 2 weeks earlier, inspired by his summer. It had no title, just movement. It started low, steady, like steps being counted, then climbed, measure by measure, into something warmer, more certain. There were flourishes, yes, but nothing showy. Everything had purpose. Notes flowed like thoughts forming mid-sentence. Honest. True. Halfway through, he glanced up. Preston sat 3 rows back, arms folded, watching. They hadn't spoken since that hallway. But Jason didn't need words. The silence between them now wasn't heavy. It was filled with understanding. When the final note hung in the air, Jason held it, just long enough for the breath in the room to catch. Then he lifted his hands. And this time, the applause came fast. Not polite. Not hesitant. Real. Charlene stood. She didn't clap at first. Just stared at her son like she couldn't believe he was hers. Then quietly she smiled. After the show, people approached him. Teachers, parents, a few students. They asked about his music, where he learned, what came next. He answered as best he could, still uncomfortable with too much attention. But one moment stayed with him most. A small boy, maybe 9, skinny with crooked glasses, walked up and whispered, "That made me want to try piano too." Jason knelt slightly. "You should. I don't know how. Doesn't matter. Just start." The boy smiled. That was enough. Later, as they drove home, Charlene was quiet. "You okay?" Jason asked. She nodded. "I just never thought I'd see something like that. Not with your name on it." He looked out the window. The street lights blurred past. "Neither did I," he said. "But maybe it was always there." She didn't answer, but her hand reached across the console and rested on his. That night, Jason sat at home with a notebook in his lap. He wasn't writing music, just words, scattered thoughts, a line he wanted to remember. You don't have to be invited to be allowed. The world hadn't given him permission to sit at that piano. He'd taken it, gently, honestly, fully. And in doing so, he reminded them, and himself, that talent doesn't care where you're from, what you wear, or how much your parents donated. It only cares that you listen to it when it calls. So if you're watching this, and wondering whether you're good enough, whether you're allowed to try, here's your sign. You are. Now go do it.